right, I think if everyone's ready, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to our third professional development luncheon that the YLD has put on. It's been a very successful program, and we couldn't do it without people that were willing and eager to come to our program, so thank you. Also, before we begin, I'd like to introduce and recognize our current ISBA president, Ms. Paula Holderman, that was kind enough to join us today. My name's Heather Pfeffer. I'm going to kind of be moderating our panel today. It's going to be kind of a free-flowing discussion. I've got some questions prepared for our panelists. I will break at certain points for questions, but if there is a time during the discussion that any of you have a question that's pertinent to what we're talking about, please raise your hand. The only thing I ask you is, because we are recording this, to put this up on the website later, is to wait until George comes by with one of our wireless microphones so that we can make sure to capture your question on video. All right. Well, to start, I don't know if any of you were like me, but when I started telling people that I'd made the decision to go to law school, I probably heard 10 times that you can do anything with a law degree. And what always bothered me was that the people saying that to me were not lawyers, so it was very hard for me to take them at their word. But luckily today we have a distinguished panel of three law graduates who actually are doing something with their law degrees other than working at law firms. So I'm going to introduce each of them to you, and then we'll get started. Our first speaker is Elizabeth Ellis Siemek. She handles attorney recruiting and professional development matters for the City of Chicago's Law Department. I'm sorry, it's Siemek. I said that wrong, I apologize. Prior to coming to the city in 2011, Ms. Siemek served as Assistant Dean and Director of the Law Career Services at DePaul University College of Law for 12 years. Before joining DePaul and leaving the practice of law behind her, Ms. Siemek was an associate at Miller, Shackham, Hamilton, Kurtzen, and Schliffke. Did I get that? Schliffke, okay. Where she practiced corporate and real estate law, and also at Catton, Munchin, and Zavis, where she practiced corporate insurance law. She's a member of the National Association for Law Placement, the Chicago Association of Legal Personnel Administrators, and the Chicago Area Professional Development Consortium. She's also a graduate of Valparaiso University School of Law. And seated to her left is Tarek Fidel. Tarek is founder and CEO of Adapta Group LLC. Adapta Group was created in 2003 to address the need for greater and more intelligent use of technology in bar exam preparation. The Adapta Bar online multi-state simulator and prep program launched early the following year, and today prepares thousands of students annually in more than 50 countries and all 50 states. Tarek graduated from Chicago-Kent College of Law in May of 2003, and he's a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois. While in law school, Tarek served as president of the Student Bar Association and was awarded the SBA President of the Year Award by the American Bar Association. Tarek also received the Bar and Gavel Award for outstanding service to his classmates, as well as the Award for Distinguished Service to the law school. Prior to attending law school, Tarek served as a consultant to numerous Fortune 500 companies on technical issues related to Y2K compliance. Tarek earned his bachelor's degree in political science from DePaul University in 1998. He recently ended his 2-year term as president of the Alumni Board of Directors at Chicago-Kent College of Law. He's a past member of the ABA Young Lawyers Division's Truth in Law School Education Committee. He's also a member of the Women in Law Committee of the Illinois State Bar Association and a past member of the Legal Education, Admission, and Competency Standing Committee of the ISBA. Tarek has also served as an ISBA delegate to the ABA's Young Lawyers Division Assembly and also served on the ISBA Young Lawyers Division Council. He currently works and lives in Chicago. And last but not least, we have Michael Negron. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you. He is the Chief of Policy in the City of Chicago Mayor's Office. Prior to joining Chicago Mayor's Office, Michael spent 2.5 years working in the Obama administration, most recently serving as a special counsel to the Department of Defense General Counsel, where he worked on treaty law, cybersecurity, information operations, and general litigation matters. Michael also served as counselor to Elizabeth Warren during her tenure as chair of the Congressional Oversight Panel for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Michael received his JD from Harvard Law School. He received a BS in Foreign Service from Georgetown University, and he's previously served in the United States Navy as a commissioned officer. So I want to welcome all of our speakers today and thank you for being here. And why don't we start by going through the line, and if you could give us an idea, we kind of got your bios, but an idea of what your typical day is like in your current position.
You want me to start?
Well, yes.
Well, my day is not typical. Every day is different. At the Department of Law, we are under a hiring plan that's mandated by the federal court. So with that, there's just a lot of paperwork and red tape that needs to happen. So my day basically is managing the various hurdles that exist in processing applications on the recruiting side, whether it be for our summer program for law students or attorneys, entry level or lateral positions for attorneys, and our general externships, other types of programs. That's just one part of my job. Then the other part is professional development, which is basically running CLE programs for the benefit of our attorneys. So for that, it depends on what program's going on or upcoming, whether I'm reaching out to speakers, doing paperwork with the MCLE board to make sure that our ethics courses are approved, or filing paperwork of completed programs to make sure that our attendees get their CLE credit. So that's why I love my job, is because no day is ever the same. Generally what I do is the same, but each day differs as to what I'm handling that day.
Thank you, Tarek.
Well, I'm completely different in terms of just running a business. So I'm at the point now where when I first started, I was doing the general things like keeping track of employees, payroll, everything that a small business owner would do. Now most of that is handled by other members of my staff. And I spend most of my day doing one of two things. I communicate with deans of law schools, because Adaptive Bar consults with law schools in terms of, we take bar preparation one step further in terms of not just giving a accurate diagnosis to students, but also giving it back to the schools so that they can see where their students are deficient and try and insert their own metrics into the process and figure out how they can make adjustments to curriculum. So I work with deans of law schools, and the other part that I try to spend most of my time doing is just innovation, just thinking of new ideas, keeping my finger on the pulse of what students need, and trying to incorporate those into the program. So that's what I try to spend most of my time doing, even though sometimes I get dragged into other things, but that's most of my day.
Thanks. And bear with me, I'm just getting over a cold, so I may clear my throat a number of times or cough. So I am the Chief of Policy. I'm largely responsible for everything that falls between education and public safety. We have designated folks who focus entirely on those two areas. So that includes technology policy, sustainability, some economic development and small business development, public health, social services. So things that you may have seen in the media, like there's a rideshare ordinance that we're trying to move through the council now to regulate Lyft and Uber and Sidecar, is, for example, something I've been working on a good bit for the last couple months. So in terms of the day-to-day, I have a team of about 14 folks who are at any given time just looking into different types of things that we could be doing, working on specific initiatives, implementing things that we launched, or working on implementation of things that we launched a year ago. And it's a very sort of unstructured environment in many ways. The mayor has his priorities, obviously, education, public safety, bringing jobs to the city, quality of life, all those types of things. But there's also just a political nature to this. So at any given day, there could be a headline or there could be a story, and oftentimes we're called upon to develop solutions in response to some, the Inspector General may have found something problematic, or there may be a story that finds that we're not meeting some needs. So in addition to the long-term things that we're focused on to meet the mayor's priorities, we also often have to come up with substantive policy initiatives to respond to things that are in the media. It is not a lawyer's job, so I'm not giving any kind of legal advice, although I will say that my background and my training is highly relevant to what I'm doing. I think it makes me better at identifying issues and of thinking through whether we have authorities or what the legal risk might be associated with a different type of path. But I think it's exciting. It's very much tied to the news cycle. Every day is different. I have to use a lot of unorthodox skill sets that I didn't know I had, or maybe I don't have, but I learn how to apply on the fly. But I'm very happy where I am. I think I do think that lawyers can do anything. I think the challenge is getting to that point. But I would endorse that statement that you made at the outset.
All right, thank you, Michael. You kind of transitioned me into my next question I was going to ask, and that is, and I'll focus this on Tarek and Elizabeth since Michael already touched on it, is how do you feel that if you do, you use your JD in what you're doing today? Since you're not working at a law firm, do you find that the skills you acquired in law school have kind of transitioned over into what you're doing now?
Sure. I definitely think that they do. My job required a JD. And I think a lot of that too has to do with the fact that we have to adhere to the Shackman Accord. So there's a lot of rules and regulations with how we go ahead and move forward with our hiring process. So in my role, I have to make sure that we're adhering to those rules and regulations, keep up to date on what changes Department of Human Resource might have made with regards to what can or can't be allowed as part of our hiring process. But I think that the general skills that law school would teach you, being able to research and write, I write a lot, having to research by going out and making sure that I'm kept up to date on what the new hiring policy is. But time management, all those, I don't want to say generic, but in a way they are generic because they can apply to a lot of different jobs, but it's what, as an attorney, you really want to tout to any prospective employer is your time management, your problem-solving skills, your team player, being a team player, having the initiative to do things on your own. The law department has 270 attorneys, and I handle all the legal recruiting and professional development, and I'm a staff of one. I don't have administrative support, so time management and organizational skills are huge for my role. I think definitely I learned that in the legal practice as well as law school. But I think those are definite skills that my legal training and legal education helped me develop and allow me to do my job, I guess, in a way that's effective and efficient to the extent government hiring can be deemed efficient.
Law school was a different experience for me. I would say that the way that I use my legal education the most is completely different because it's not really substantive. It's the way that the thing that I think I got out of law school the most was the communication skills. It refined my level of communication and problem solving to a point that significantly helps me on a day-to-day basis, because things that I probably would have struggled with before, I can get to the root of much quicker. But law school for me was, I very quickly realized in my first year that I wasn't going to go to a big firm. I didn't have the grades to go to a big firm. I knew immediately that wasn't going to happen. So there was a different aspect of law school for me, so I sort of shifted my focus in my second and third year to making the most out of law school from a social perspective. So I got involved with the SBA, I excelled in that, and it led to me becoming, what the youngest person to ever be appointed to the alumni board right out of law school. And that connected me with people that have helped me in ways that I couldn't even measure now. So I think, interestingly enough, I don't use my JD as much as probably my two colleagues do on a day-to-day basis, although it helps with employment issues, with patent issues, which are prevalent in my field. But mostly it connects me with the people that I need to know that help me excel. So if I have a patent issue, I go to somebody that's on the alumni board with me that's an equity partner at a large firm in Chicago, and he gives me a break and he takes care of me, and I know that I'm being taken care of because those are the contacts that I've made through law school. So that's really how it has helped me the most.
Thank you. Michael, I'm curious, in your job at the mayor's office, are there a lot of colleagues of yours that have JDs as well, or are you kind of in the minority?
There aren't very many in the mayor's office. There are a couple, and we don't have attorneys in the mayor's office as attorneys, so to the extent that there are any, they're doing non-legal jobs. We rely on the law department for our legal counsel.
Do you find that there are a lot of attorneys doing non-legal jobs where you're at?
It's less than a half dozen. But I think in every case, you can see the difference. There's just something to the discipline of the training, and then if you've been out practicing, it's highly relevant to the type of work that we do, whether it's understanding the different risks that a particular proposal entails, or if we're on the other side of a transaction of some kind and knowing what types of things to look for. It can be just knowing how to communicate with our law department. A lot of times the answer, if you're trying to accomplish some end, whether it's because the mayor wants it or someone on his staff is trying to understand what we can do about a particular issue, the answer you get is often dependent on the type of question that you ask. And so legal training, in interacting with the law department, legal training is very helpful in understanding, well, okay, so you can't do this, but what if we modified it this way, or what if we did the following? What does that do to the analysis? So I think it's certainly it's been very helpful to me, and I think it adds to the value that I add in my role.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you were, I think, one of our panelists that did work on the law firm side for a while. Is there a certain thing that happened that kind of made you want to shift your focus and do a non-law firm related career?
Well, I started out at Cat & Muchin, which is a very large firm, and I worked in the 90s in the corporate world when the market was fantastic, but it wasn't fantastic for my life because it was like 80-hour work weeks, which I just personally did not want for myself, which made me want to shift to a smaller firm, which was Miller Shackman. I loved my time there, but then ultimately realized that the practice itself was the issue for me. I wasn't 100% happy with what I was doing or fulfilled with what I was doing, but I didn't want to leave the practice of law completely. In the traditional sense I did, but not overall, which through networking, you mentioned, just your law school contacts. Networking was huge, and just trying to figure out what can I do. I also believe, with a few exceptions, that you can do anything with a law degree. The exception would be if it requires a specialty education or training that you don't have. But just trying to figure it out, and I didn't really know what it was until somebody had suggested career services, and I thought that was a perfect avenue. And what kind of put the nail in the coffin for me to completely leave was one of the partners I was working for had been complaining that for the last 3 days he was at the office. We were working on a deal, and he would leave early to come to the office and late to go home. So for 3 days he didn't see his kids. And I knew long term at some point I'd want to have a family, and I didn't want to go 3 days without seeing my family. So even at a small firm, the nature of the practice, people say it's a jealous mistress. And at that job, I actually understood what they meant by that. So I, at that point, decided to go alternative.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to see if anyone has any questions for any of our panelists. Oh. Yes, just 1 second, and George will bring the microphone over to you.
I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much with this, but do any of you have any advice on how to sell your the skills that are relevant to a new position from your legal background, where you are transitioning careers and you may not have the specific background that they're looking for? For example, if you were going into an HR department, if your degree is not in HR, but you still have obviously relevant skills, how do you go about selling that when you are applying for jobs?
Sure. You know, I would say this question would come up to me all the time when I was at DePaul as the director of the Career Service Office. And the best advice I could give is really pay attention to the resume you use and how you're going to market that. I think a lot of us are so used to the traditional chronological resume. And if you're trying to break into an alternative career and just use your recently at a law firm doing all legal work, the prospective employer isn't necessarily going to think, how is that going to be relevant to me or this job? So you have to do the work for them and break it down and create what I would suggest would be a functional resume, where you kind of look at what are the skills of this career that I'm trying to pursue, what kind of experience do I have, even if it's, you know, in the traditional legal sense. I would tout it as breaking out your resume, identifying those skill sets that they're looking for. If they're looking for human resource experience, you know, try and think of how do you have that, maybe not in a traditional HR job, but what are the skills that an HR individual would be doing that they're looking for, so they can see straight out, because they're only going to spend, you know, maybe 5 seconds or a quick glance, depending on how many resumes they get. Or they might be a type of employer that has an electronic search feature where they're looking for keywords, and they're not going to pick up that stuff from a traditional chronological resume. So that's where the functional can kind of help you get yourself maybe a little bit more time, a focus by the prospective employer rather than just a quick glance. That would be my suggestion.
I agree completely. The only thing I would then add is just more detail on that is there are probably a lot of things that you do where you're using skills that you're not actually viewing as skills. So you may be managing people and you don't view yourself as managing them. You may be, if the types of folks you're advising, if you're working directly with a partner or with a client or with a particular level within a client, things that you may not have otherwise thought to pull out that might be highly relevant to the job you're applying for. So if you interact regularly in your attorney role with a C-level official at a company or an HR person or whatever it is, thinking about that interaction and selling it as, you know, provided sensitive counsel to whoever or interacted regularly with whoever. They're just, as you think about your experience set and view it from the mindset of somebody who's not an attorney and who doesn't know the significance of all the different things that might matter to folks in your profession, you might find that you have fresh eyes about, it helps you have fresh eyes about what you're doing and how it might be relevant to someone outside of the community.
I don't have anything to add.
Any other questions before we move on? All right. Michael, in your bio, we heard that you've had a very interesting career path in the public service sector and government. At any point when you were in law school or when you went to law school, did you think of pursuing a law firm job, or did this all kind of organically flow from when you graduated? If you could give us an idea of how your career path went about the way it did.
Right. So going into law school, I was pretty sure that I did not want to work for a law firm, but I wanted to keep the option. So I did all the interviews that everybody looks to do, and I summered for most of one summer, with my second summer with a law firm. But I knew that I wanted to be in government, and I knew that I wanted to be in politics, and so I approached the people I tried to meet on the faculty, to the summer activities that I did, to my activities that I did as an extracurricular, with that in mind. So I tried to meet the professors that I knew were active in that universe, and I tried to work with them. My first summer, I did something for Senator Durbin on the Hill. For the second half of my second summer, I worked at the Center for American Progress in D.C. In addition to, I was at Mayor Brown here for a chunk of time. So I pursued it with that in mind. There's no real science to it. I think I had a good friend who had been who was in law school with me and had been in politics for a while, and he likened searching for jobs as sort of pulling every thread possible, and you might not even realize that one path is significant until it turns up with something. And literally every job I've had since graduating from law school, there was no application for. So I've been put into every position based on what I'd done in the last position to some extent. And every time it was kind of I was nervous, I didn't know what was going to happen, I was talking to different people, and then it panned out. So I didn't have even a process to send a resume to. I had to have a resume, but it was no process. So in those cases, it really was casting a wide net, doing as much in the field, whether it's, so I guess if I had analogize it to being at a firm now or being in law school now, volunteering for a campaign or trying to find an opportunity to work with or for folks who are in that space. There is the Civic Consulting Alliance is an organization that we deal with a lot. If you're interested in city stuff, we deal with a lot as a city, and they go out and they bring pro bono help in for folks who work like as a team on a specific project. So we'll have lawyers or we'll have people from McKinsey or Bain or whatever working on a city project. So that's one example. So what I found is it is about networking, right? It is about who you know to some extent and having the opportunity to do good work. But ultimately there's no science to it. And so I went in with that in mind. There are other people I know who stumbled into it because of someone they knew was in some position and they needed somebody and they really trusted him or her. So there's a lot of different paths. I think it's just being mindful of where you want to go and trying to meet people and work with people and get a good reputation with people who are in wherever it is you want to go, whether it's political stuff or whether it's you want to go in-house somewhere. I feel like it's the same type of best practices regardless of where you want to go. Do you have any?
I guess that being said, how important do you all see the idea of networking with other lawyers, even if your ultimate goal is to go in-house or to maybe pursue something other than a law firm? I know, Tarek, you've touched on how important networking has been with attorneys in your business. I don't know how you all feel about if that's something, if someone feels that they want to maybe go in-house or break out of a law firm job, should they be a part of the ISBA or the CBA? Do you think that there's some kind of value in that?
The answer is yes.
Yes, of course.
I definitely think networking is important, and I am a success story. Every job that I got outside of like Catton, which I got through my law school's OCI process, it was all via networking. The Miller-Shackman opportunity came to me by talking to somebody who introduced me to some recruiter who was looking to fill the position. DePaul came from networking actually with the girl who is not an attorney. So I always tell people, don't limit your networking to people with law degrees. She was a Barbary rep when I was a law student. She worked for Barbary, and so I got to know her that way. And lo and behold, she's the one who introduced me to the DePaul opportunity. And then the city opportunity, the job posting itself was brought to my attention through somebody that I had been networking with. So I truly believe it's important. One thing I would always tell students when I was at DePaul too, it's not who you know, but who knows you. That really is important. So you need to get out there and need to let people know your story. And don't be nervous about letting people know, because if they don't know what you're looking for, they can't help you. So I definitely think networking is an important job search tool.
Yeah, to add to what Michael said earlier, I think probably the single most important contact that I made was a professor in law school in my last semester of law school. Ironically, he was an adjunct professor, really brilliant guy, and it just turned out that I was taking a seminar class because it was something that I was interested in. It was technology in the practice of law. So the class itself wasn't really applicable. It was extremely interesting in that he kind of broke down like how big firms or how firms in general are profitable and how to calculate that. He broke it down into a formula, which I thought was really brilliant. But so I had no idea, obviously, that I was going to start a bar review company. I had the idea when I was studying for the bar and wasn't happy with the options that I had. So when I had the idea, I guess to go back, I really fostered my relationship with this guy because it turns out there was 3 people in the class, 2 of which were LLMs that barely spoke English. So he had no choice but to be my friend, and so which is nice, and so when I had the idea, the first person I turned to, because he was a legal technologist, he went to Harvard and Oxford, and he then started at Jones Day and then became the chief information officer of Kirkland. And so and at the time he was working with Thomson, working on West KM, the knowledge management software for big firms. So he a really brilliant guy. So when I had the idea, I called him and said, I have this idea. What do you think? This is 2 weeks before the bar exam, so I had spent the entire summer studying, and he said, and I was obsessed with the idea, and he said, I think the idea is brilliant, and I'll mentor you through it if you want me to. And if he hadn't said that, my life would have gone in a completely different way, because that, is scary. I mean, it's a mix of, being able to do what I did is a mix of desperation and, seeing an opportunity that knocks and just keeping your eyes open. But, people say, oh, you're so creative, it was a really brilliant idea. It really wasn't. It was just kind of an act of desperation, because there was 2 weeks I was going to take the bar, and then what? The options that I had weren't good enough for me. So if he had not said that, it was like the one contact, and I had no idea that he was going to be that person. So it's you never know. It's like, which string are you going to pull on? You never really know who you're going to meet that's going to become probably one of the most important people in your life. So that's one thing that I would say is kind of keep your eyes open and that's it. Yeah.
Jared, did you have a business background to work from, or?
Yeah, kind of. So I always wanted to go to law school, and I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I kind of got the idea, obviously, of starting your own company and being your own boss. And then I just randomly fell into technology, so I got a political science degree. I spent most of my time at U of I at Champaign, but I transferred and graduated from DePaul because I took a job in technology. So it was really hot, and the market was hot at the time, and I just, I thought it was pretty easy. I just happened to be natural at it, and so I started working for companies like United Airlines and Allstate and State Farm and like huge companies that have offices all over the country. And so I just randomly fell into it. So I delayed law school because I thought I would cash in on this frenzy. So I guess it was kind of, so when I went into law school, I sort of had this technology mindset. I was really interested in it because I had experienced it in a big corporate environment, and I was interested in technology and how technology intersects with the law. And luckily enough, I was in the one field that's probably the farthest behind of any other specialty or professional field in terms of technology. So it was really ripe. What I thought was something super simple at the time, that doctors, nurses, dentists, everybody else was doing this, we didn't have it. So, to me it seemed really simple. So the business background, kind of. Not formal, but yeah, I had exposure to it. So, and it's interesting that this morning I was reading an article on how scientists have found that there is actually a risk gene, and that certain people have this risk gene. I think they said like 1 in 5 people have this risk gene. So whether or not you're risk averse, it's just interesting. It's interesting that there are certain people that are, and they were talking about it in terms of the Olympics and how, some people are okay with going 90 miles an hour down a hill, and most people wouldn't dream of doing that. So it is really interesting. I think it's either in you or it's not. And so, in terms of, obviously there's alternative careers that don't involve taking a huge risk and starting a company and hiring employees. But some people I think that they have the risk gene, but they don't. And that, I think that's the difference between success and failure. Because it's not just taking that first initial risk. You have to do it again and again and again. And it's the concept of going all in. You have to, there's multiple times. Every 3 years I'll say, okay, we're bringing this company, we're raising this company down to the ground, and we're rebuilding it the way that if I were to do this again, how would I do it? And so, it's very risky. I take a lot of risks that most of my staff is not comfortable with, but that's the point. So anyway. I digress
No,
as
it's a
usual.
It's a good point because the next question I have is kind of based on risk, and I don't know if Elizabeth, you had this experience, but what advice would you have for someone who maybe has this comfortable law firm job? They've had it for a while, they're financially secure, and then they think to themselves, you know what, I don't know if this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, but then they look at maybe an in-house position or some other type of alternative career, and there is a big pay cut they might take. What advice would you have? I know that there's probably a happy versus a lifestyle versus benefit analysis that you do, but did you find yourself at that crossroads at one point?
The pay cut, definitely. Even from Catton to Miller Shackman, there was a pay cut from a big firm to a medium or small firm. Definitely taking my DePaul job, there was a huge pay cut. And then government, I make a good living, but you're not working for the city to get rich. So making that move for me, it was scary to leave the practice because I spent so many years and so much money to get that degree. I think ultimately at the end of the day, I knew that it would just, if I prolonged it, it would just get harder and the salary would keep getting higher. So you'd get the golden handcuffs, and I didn't want to fall into that. So, I had to be honest with myself and just kind of look at, okay, what loans did I have? What kind of lifestyle did I allow myself to get into? I credit my parents. I went to law school straight from undergrad, so I was relatively young, if you will, when I graduated from law school. And my parents were really good influence on making sure that I didn't all of a sudden go gangbusters with having this amazing paycheck, which a lot of my classmates did. They're buying their Beamers, they're buying their Mercedes, they're getting these beautiful places. And I lived very simple because I knew I had to pay my loans back. So I didn't let myself get into that financial rut, which I think a lot of people do. That's the first thing. But then second, I don't think I have that risk gene, but I have enough of a curiosity to see what else was out there. And I wasn't willing to just settle knowing that I wasn't happy. I was in my 20s. That's a really long time to work at something that you're not 100% satisfied or fulfilled with. So I figured, what could it hurt to try something different? If I didn't like it, I'd go back, whether I could find another job or hang up my own shingle. So what I did is I rationalized. I went to law school full time, so it was 3 years. So I figured I would practice law for 1 year of each year I went to law school, and then 1 year for good measure. So it was 4 years. I figured I put in my time. If you put in my time. Yes, I call myself a recovering attorney. And it's been the best decision I have made. Each job change is scary. People get used to their comfort zone, but I think it's the risk and the excitement of something new that keeps you alive. You think of, my sister always says, you think of the medical field. They know if somebody's alive based on, the heart rate. It's going up and down. If it's flatline, you're dead. And I figure if you're staying somewhere where it's boring and you're not challenging yourself, you basically just flatlined your career, and I didn't want to do that.
Michael, I know you said that at the mayor's office there's a few other attorneys with law degrees, but they aren't practicing, obviously, as lawyers, correct? Have you seen any trend, either at the mayor's office or where you were before, with more and more people kind of making the transition from having either a law firm job or a JD and then going into either the public sector or some kind of non-law firm job?
Yeah, I think it was. Coming in DC, it's much more prevalent. I would say there's a lot of back and forth. So particularly, if people become experts in a particular field, they'll go back and forth between the Justice Department or so. I don't know that I would say I've observed the same thing in Chicago. There are certainly, I think, in the law department, our corporate counsel came from Kirkland, and his first deputy, I forget what law firm she came from, but she also. My sense is it's probably to some extent defined by market, and I don't think I have the worldliness of having been in enough places. I do think, however, that certainly we would not, for non-legal roles, rule out attorneys by any means. I think a big part of it is we don't get very much interest. So often the applicants we get are not, for different types of roles, are not lawyers. And so I think that probably says a little bit something about the types of things lawyers tend to look for. I don't think that, that at least here, it's in DC, a lawyer, you have so many lawyers who are trying to get out of legal practice, and they all want to be in policy, or they all want to be in politics, or they all want to be in something. So it's a little bit different here. I think it's just not, it hasn't proven as attractive. But I can say that we would never, if a person is good and demonstrates the types of things we're looking for, such as analytical ability, ability to communicate at a high level, sort of a knowledge of risk and knowing when something is sensitive and when something isn't, all types, among many traits, I don't think that we would ever exclude someone for because they have a law degree. I think there's a lot there that's relevant. We just haven't had the same degree of interest as when I was in DC, when everyone seemed to be a lawyer. So it was just a little bit, I think the market's different here.
Elizabeth, maybe you can speak to this. When you were at DePaul in the Career Services Department, did you ever find employers who weren't law firms that would specifically come to law schools and search for applicants?
We did have, Deloitte, speaking of alternative employers with your husband. We did have corporations look for, Allstate was another employer that recruited at DePaul, but the majority of the on-campus employers were law firms by nature. And I think that's also, most corporations don't tend to hire straight from law school because they're usually looking to the law firms to train the attorneys before they bring them on. So I think that would probably explain why it was a smaller number of corporate or non-law firm or non-legal, traditional legal type of employers recruiting.
At this point, I'll open it up again to see if anybody has any questions for our panelists. Okay. Again, I don't mean to focus on Elizabeth, and Tarek and Michael, feel free to jump in. But if there is somebody who has practiced at a law firm for several years out of law school, and they've decided to make that transition, either go in-house, work in politics, is there a certain way they should structure their resume? I know we talked about maybe highlighting attributes that you might not necessarily think of it, like managing people, but is there a certain way that maybe the resume should even be formatted differently than if you're looking for a law firm job?
One thing that I would tell the students and alumni when I was counseling them at DePaul is that depends on your employer, but a lot of them do use those electronic systems because they get too many resumes in to manually review them. So the biggest thing is to use those key terms, those buzzwords, and basically parrot back the language used in the job posting. So one of the things I would have or encourage people to add to an alternative career resume would be a summary of qualifications at the very beginning. Rather than an objective statement, use a summary of qualifications and look at that job posting. And if they say you need to have X number of years experience in here, literally bullet point that, 5 years of experience doing this, or self-starter, whatever it is, put that up there so that if they are doing that electronic search, the computer will grab your resume into a queue to be looked at closer by human eyes, and that will get you a step closer than just doing a traditional chronological or even a functional resume. The functional resume can be helpful with those headers of the skill sets, but I think even with a functional resume, the summary of qualifications is helpful.
So I think I would look for something a little different, only because I think, as I alluded to earlier, most of the people, we don't really post when we have availability. We just we put out feelers and people send us resumes. And so I would say if as a general matter, if you're a lawyer and you're looking to get into a non-legal role that is political in some way or policy focused or whatever, my sense would be if you do litigation, focus on the crisis management elements of your resume. So situations where it's highly public, or it's maybe not public on the news, but perhaps public in a sector. So you're dealing with someone a client who feels very shaken up and sensitive. So highlighting the crisis management component. I think if you're transactional, highlighting the size of the transactions or the sophistication of the transactions, that's probably a good attention grabber, depending on the type of work you're looking at. I think across the board, your interaction with people who are high level, so if you're interacting with sort of C-suite executives, or you're interacting, maybe you're the primary point of contact with the client, I think those are the types of things that can translate readily to non-lawyers. I think they'll get that. And across the board, the sophistication of the work. So I guess if it's in the litigation component, are you drafting? Are you the one explaining to the client? Are you in the courtroom? If it's on the transactional side, are you dealing with the client? Is there something novel about the type of transactional work that you're doing, or is it sort of cutting edge? Was it a new type of work that's been ginned up lately? I think any of those elements, if we're looking to hire someone who can jump in and immediately deal with some kind of unexpected thing that happens and we need to come up with an answer quickly, or we need someone who can interact with, the 55-year-old commissioner who thinks he knows everything, or someone, the police commissioner or whoever, someone who's a very senior figure and has a lot of juice, are you going to be able to slide in and talk to them? So I think those are the crisis management, the C-level stuff, the transaction size, the sophistication. I think those are the key things if you're looking to get into sort of my unstructured world.
Again, this question's for everyone. Maybe Tarek might have a different idea since he's the business owner, but just from having friends that have been in a law firm for a while and then have made a decision to go in-house, and if they focus on a job that maybe isn't a JD specific job, I've sometimes heard that they get feedback where people think that they're going to be too expensive or too overqualified, or because the job doesn't require a law degree and they have one, those employers are less likely to look at that candidate thinking they may be overqualified. Do any of you have any thoughts on that, or have you ever heard anything like that before?
Actually, I can't think of everybody that I know that's gone in-house. My friends that are at firms that have gone in-house, they've gone in a legal capacity with the intention, with the intention of not necessarily staying in the legal department, but getting to a C-level. No, I'm sorry, I can't think of anything.
And I would say, yeah, I've heard that. And that's where I think in a pure alternative career role, that's where that functional resume comes in really handy, because you're almost drawing them in like, oh my God, they have this, they have this, they have this. It's not until the very end of your resume that they see your educational training that says JD, and then your employment history that might include what law firms you practiced at. So by that time, you've probably excited them enough to say, oh my God, they're right on point of at least somebody I might be interested in considering. And that might very well lead into an opportunity to come in and interview with them and sell yourself even further in person. But if they see that traditional chronological resume that starts out that you were an associate or a partner at all these different firms, and then your education, some of them might say, with that belief, oh, you know what, I'm not even going to bother looking at a lawyer because they might be too expensive. So that would be my advice. I mean, I can't guarantee you that it will work, but it's at least one way of kind of like trying to reel them in, say, hey, I am somebody you should look at, and this is how my legal training could really help you in a non-legal capacity.
I think I agree with that. I think it depends on the role. So I think if it's an analogous role, it's probably less of a barrier. So if you're a partner at a law firm and somebody's looking for a director of a division or a manager or whatever it is, and you're going to be very senior, I feel like it's probably not a barrier. I think it's when you're trying to start anew in a path, and you're trying to get out of the law and you're trying to transition to something. That's, I think, where the strategy of how you go about it matters, and I think that's a situation where you want to get in and explain what you're trying to do. And explain, I've been doing this for a while, I'm trying to get into this, and I'd like to bridge over. But certainly I would say that it really depends on the role that you're applying for, and are they looking for someone who is like you in terms of your experience, your smarts, your background, you just don't have the degree that they're looking for, then I think that's a little bit different than you're actually taking a significant step down, in the career path you're trying to enter in, and that's one where you just got to get in there and explain what you're trying to do.
And I think too that's where the network really comes into play, because if you can not only market yourself that way, but then you have somebody on the inside who can be a cheerleader for you and say, you know what, you really should take a look at him or her, whether they're an internal or external who just happens to know this person because they're former law school classmates or business partners or did work together in some capacity. So I do think, you know, it's not just you standing on your own. That's very important, but the network can really help boost your credibility to a prospective employer, for them to realize, you know what, maybe I should, it doesn't hurt to at least interview them and see maybe how they might fit into the ultimate goal of what we're trying to accomplish here.
I think generally also the perception, I think, in the business community is probably just the opposite of what you said, Heather, because I think the perception is that lawyers are not fine. I think that the market is difficult for lawyers now. And so I think that people in business think that it's probably an opportune time to get talent that they might not have been able to afford previously. Yeah. So.
All right, well, thank you. I think maybe we'll wrap up a little bit early, so if anyone else has any questions, I'll open it up now, or since we are a little bit early, I guess if you want to come up and ask any of our panelists, you can also do that. So on that note, does anyone have anything else they'd like to ask? Yeah, hold on.
I was just wondering what the three panelists think about opportunities for new lawyers who are just graduating from law school and have perhaps already determined that they don't want to practice in a traditional setting. What do you see in terms of the job market for those folks?
Intertraditional, you know, since leaving DePaul, I haven't really kept my finger on the pulse of entry level. So I can't say what I've seen. People who want to go into alternative, I haven't seen what they're doing. But I would think it would be the same approach regardless of whether the market was good or bad, with the type of self-assessment you're going to be doing, the network you're going to be reaching out to, and figuring out where your strengths are, so that you can sell the employer on why you're the perfect person for the job, because you can do it and you're really invested in it, not because you need a job to pay your bills.
Well, Elizabeth, let me ask you a very specific question about the city law department, since you are in charge of hiring. Have you seen a trend away from hiring newer lawyers? Because frankly, you can probably now get lawyers with experience who are interested in jobs where you would not have been able to get them, you know, in years previous. Have you seen a change in the city hiring?
We have seen it change, but actually completely opposite. We used to not, it had been about 10 years since the city would recruit, if you would, entry-level attorneys. But as of last year, we started, while we can't do OCI, we do have an open application process that we started last year for graduating 3Ls. So we hired about 7 class of 2013 attorneys, and now we have a posting live for a class of 2014 law grads. And then we also just listed a posting for people who graduated anytime from December 2009 through June of 2013. So if any of you are interested in attorney positions at the city, I would encourage you to go to our website and submit your application, because there are opportunities.
That's very good information. And Michael, I think perhaps you might have been willing to respond to my first question.
Yeah, so I think if you are a law student about to graduate and you're looking for a non-legal job, then it's highly dependent on what you are bringing to the table. So if you worked in if you were coming from another profession, then I think you have a different set of options than if you went straight through. And I think if you went straight through, then you're in a situation where you're looking for an entry-level job, with the added bonus of having a degree in this field, and then it's just about finding the right place to start. I can't envision very many situations where if you're looking for a non-legal role and you have a law degree, unless you have some kind of work experience in the field you're trying to enter into, where it's going to make a huge difference. I think it can, depending on a number of factors, but for the most part, it's that situation where you're trying to get yourself in somewhere, and your training and the skills you use may end up being a big bonus, but your initial role and your compensation probably won't reflect that. That's my sense.
And Tarek, what about you? What kinds of opportunities do you have, even within your own company, or companies and tech companies that you see?
Well, I think that there's a lot of opportunities. In my company, we hire recent grads that are very highly qualified, that for some reason, usually top 5% of the class, to do editorial work, with the expectation that we're simply just employing them until they find a real job. So the point is just for them to make money in the meantime and sort of stay fresh. At least they're working with the law. Those are really the only opportunities. I would love to, this is something that I've been considering lately, is that I would love to bring attorneys in as business development people. But I think that the problem with that is that I don't necessarily know how long I could hang on to them. And sort of tangentially related, I think to kind of incorporate into this question and previous questions, there is actually a risk involved in going out. I mean, now in particular, I think a lot of attorneys are thinking, well, the opportunities might not necessarily be there at the firms, and so maybe they'll hang their own shingle, which I think is the riskiest. It's something that we've dealt with as an organization, as the ISBA, the ABA, and there is a big risk there's a risk that's different in doing that, because at least you're in the practice. But frankly, you probably shouldn't be. I think most people do that because they don't have another job opportunity, not necessarily because they're as entrepreneurial as they think, or they think, my family has connections, so I can get enough business to live off of. I think I do believe fundamentally that attorneys should be trained by firms, or at least by another attorney. But generally, there's there's a risk in that, and obviously the obvious malpractice risk. But there's also a risk in going to an alternative legal career right out. I think one of the biggest risks that I took was, when people say, I've said this in other interviews where they've said, well, what was the biggest risk? And I said, well, I risked my legal career starting this company, because by the time you figure out whether or not something's going to work or not, if you give it a fair shake, it takes you 2 years. So in the meantime, I start this, and then 2 years later, I go to a firm and say, hey, how about a job? And they'll say, hey, where have you been? Why would we hire you as opposed to somebody else that's right out of law school, that's fresh out of law school? Because I wasn't practicing. I could say, oh, well, I was working with MBE questions. They don't care. So there is a huge risk, and I think it's something that you really need to, especially in this market. I would highlight that, because I think people are more inclined to pursue other opportunities. But keep in mind, I mean, don't be, I would hope that nobody would be hasty about it, but really look at what you're doing, and whether or not you have that risk gene, whether or not you are okay doing something outside of the practice, because it very well may mean that it's either impossible or at least extremely difficult for you to go back into the profession. So that's what I would say.
And I'll just take this opportunity to market an opportunity that the city offers, is that if you are in that situation and you need to obviously take something non-legal to pay the bills, but you want to stay fresh in your legal skills, the city's law department has fantastic volunteer opportunities. They also have paid law clerk opportunities on occasion. It's more than minimum wage, but you're not going to make a huge living off of it, but at least it's a way to keep your fingers in the practice of law, and kind of add something to your resume while you're trying to figure out where you're going to land once things turn around market-wise. So that also, those programs you can find information on our website, or I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards, but that's one way to really keep those skills fresh while you're looking.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, I do have two announcements really quick.
Okay,
I
go
just
for it.
wanted to highlight, if all of you could go to the YLD's website, there's two events that the YLD has coming up that we're very excited about. One is the Beanbag Tournament that's going to be held on March 8th at Mahoney's Pub and Grill. And the other big event that the YLD will be hosting is the Spring Soiree at the Hard Rock on April 25. So I want you all to put that on your calendars and keep your ears and eyes open for those two fantastic events. And I want to give a big thank you and round of applause to our panelists. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Heather. Just real quick, I'm Gene Keno. I'm honored to be the chair of this year's YLD, and I just want to take the time to thank Heather and George for putting together a wonderful program. We couldn't do this without you. I'd like to once again thank our panelists for your candor and for your thoughts. And I want to thank all of you for being here and taking the time. And I want you to look out for the events that Heather mentioned. And thanks. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.